when we're faced with these global crises in our different generations, this is one of ours. And I think if we choose to kind of sit silently, then we're siding with oppression.
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. No mai haere mai, welcome to the first episode of Down to Earth Conversations for 2024 with me, your host, Andy Dixon. I've been on a bit of a summer break, but I'm super stoked to be back again, ready for another year of conversations with ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. I've already been having some wonderful conversations and I can't wait to bring them to you, covering a huge range of topics and themes. At the end of last year, I was running a fundraiser to upgrade some of the equipment. I had some equipment that was failing and it was making it really hard to get these episodes out to you. I'm just overwhelmed by the support that I received through that fundraiser. We reached target, allowed me to upgrade that equipment and actually cover some unexpected costs that popped up in the meantime as well. So thank you so much to anyone who contributed to that. Thank you also to you if you would have liked to contribute to that but didn't have the means. I know it was heading towards Christmas. We're in a cost of living crisis. So if you couldn't give, then kei te pai, all good. I really appreciate the support across the board in a whole bunch of different ways. I also promised that if we reached the target, I would shave off my 8 years of bearded glory. And as a man of my word, I did that and I uploaded it to social media. So if you'd like to see that or any of the other things I post on there, downtoearth.conversations on both Instagram and Facebook, and I would love to connect with you on there. Also, I don't normally go on about this, but if you like this podcast and would like to help other people find it, then I would love it if you could rate it or review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Or even just consider who's one person that you could tell about this podcast. I would really appreciate that. So thanks so much for your support. Before we get into today's conversation, I'm recording this intro just a few days after Waitangi Day here in New Zealand, where we, acknowledge, remember the Treaty of Waitangi as the founding document of our nation. I was going to say celebrate it, but I don't know, with all the ways that the government has breached the treaty over the years, I'm not sure it's as much a celebration as a chance to reflect and to see how things could change. As I've been thinking about this partnership in the last few days, this partnership between Māori and non-Māori and what it could look like, I was thinking about episode 72 guest James Beck's podcast, Ngāhere, The Many Connections. It's just a beautiful example of what it sounds like when Māori and non-Māori get together to explore life together. In James's case, he got together with others to explore creation care through scriptural and indigenous lenses. So I would totally recommend checking out Ngāhere, and I'll put some links in my show notes. But to today's conversation, obviously there is a fair bit going on in the world at present, and one of those things, quite a big thing in the last few months, is the Israeli war on Gaza. Many in the church are siding with Israel due to what I consider problematic interpretations of the Bible. But while that's happening, there are others standing up for the innocents caught up in this hideous war. And one of those people is Sophie Fasi-Mohenoa. She is part of a small but growing group called Christians for Peace Aotearoa that has arisen in the midst of these humanitarian atrocities. And so we talk about the hows and whys of that, grounded in her time living in the West Bank, working with Messianic Jews and Palestinian Christians looking to drive peace in the region. We talk about how this group came about, what they're involved in and what they're hoping to achieve. We hear what she learned from her time living in Israel-Palestine, her experience as a foreigner in an occupied land, the hope that she found there, and what we can do about it from the other side of the world. We touch on a range of resources and connections that I will link to in the show notes for those who would like to educate themselves a bit about the conflict or who just want to get in touch with Sophie and the team. It's a conversation that's really timely and gives so much food for thought and action. This is episode 86 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Sophie Fasi-Mohenoa. I'm pleased to be here with Sophie Fasi-Mohenoa. Sophie, kia ora, welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora, thank you for having me, Andy. Good to be here. Nice job on the pronunciation.
Excellent. Yeah, for those who are listening, I ballsed it up when I just tried, so we did a retake. But kei te pai, it's all good. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Ko rangitoto te maunga tiru nei taku ngākau. Ko moana nui a kiwa te moana e mahia nei a kumaharahara. No tāmaki makaurua hau. Ko tangata tiriti te iwi. E mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nehe o ngā motu e noho nei au. Ko Sophie Fasi-Mohenoa tōku ingoa, as you've said. Yeah, so just wanted to mihi to rangitoto, the mountain that speaks to my heart. The Pacific Ocean is the ocean where my worries are alleviated. I'm from Auckland. I'm a person of the treaty. And I just wanted to mihi to the ancestral spiritual landmarks where I now live in New Plymouth. Yeah, so I'm Sophie. I'm a youth worker. But I've had a few different hats. I used to work at Tear Fund and communications. As I mentioned, born and bred Auckland, come from a family, 3 of us siblings, love my whānau, my brother's a pastor, my sister's a musician, and being an auntie is probably my favourite role in life.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, 2019 and 2020, I spent a bit of time volunteering at an organisation who are doing peace and reconciliation work in Israel and Palestine. So, I think that's a bit about me. Oh, and I just got married too. I should probably mention that.
Yeah. How long ago?
Hence the name change. We were actually going to triple barrel our last name to Fasi-Mohenoa Rice, but it was just too much of a mouthful. It was about 9 months ago now. So, yes, very stoked.
Cool.
Living the dream.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear you on the auntie thing. I mean, obviously I'm not an auntie, but that having a niece or nephew is just really special.
Yeah, totally.
And when it comes to that relationship, I've got 3 kids of my own, but I can give those ones back.
Yeah.
And, I've got my ones. So,
yeah.
Not that I don't love my kids, but
yeah.
It's a different kind of relationship where you can just, dote on them in a way that their parents don't necessarily, and then
spoil
give them
have all the fun and hand them back. Yeah, totally.
Cool. So you've mentioned already that you were involved in Tear Fund. You've been over doing some stuff with people doing peace in the Middle East or in Palestine. What is it that ignites your heart about this justice kind of focus?
Great question. Is that just like in life in general, or when it comes to Israel Palestine?
No, just in life in general, because like it's obviously the Palestine thing's obviously not your only thing that you care about.
Yes.
You've got this heart that is concerned for those who, are marginalised, or those who don't have what many of us have, or, all those kind of things is evident in what we're going to talk about today. But where does that come from for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, part of it is a bit of a disposition naturally. Like, I remember being an intermediate. This is so cheesy and is also going to show my age. I remember changing the lyrics to a John Mayer song to be about like poverty and social justice when I was like 11 years old. Like, I think there's always just been this thing where I've just cared deeply for wanting to see people thrive, which I think then when you trace that back, I'm like, oh, I know that's such a cheesy answer, and you could basically answer anything, just slap it on for anything kind of Christian, but I think it's Jesus. I think there's this heart that I think we've all been given, but for me, I feel it in seeing the real brokenness and the fracture of relationships between people, and between us and our whenua, between us within ourselves, like mental health. There's so many areas of broken relationship, but I think Jesus is the ultimate reconciler, and so I think there's this heart of Jesus of just life to its full flourishing that can be possible in and amongst
Yeah.
brokenness, that captures my heart quite strongly. So I'm a bit of a fiery one when it comes to justice, but I think I never want to become a person who has also disconnected justice from Jesus, because I think that's also a danger too.
Have you been in church contexts where that's been sort of fostered and supported? Like, have the church environments that you've been in encouraged that, or has it been like feeling a bit at odds with where things are at, or what's that been like for
Good
you?
question. I think some of my experience would say yes, and some of my experience would say no. I think currently, I'm at a church where this last year we've just gone through a massive conversation, and then we're a Baptist church, so we voted on marriage equality within our church, and so and it was passed, which is wonderful. But I think I've been part of churches who have been in spaces like that of justice, but I think just humanity in relationship with God. But then I've also been with churches that kind of would probably prioritize salvation, or that kind of rhetoric more. So I think I've been in both camps with that, I think.
I find it fascinating because when you were saying what drives you, you're like Jesus. I see Jesus being this guy who's driven by all that sort of stuff.
Mm.
And then we've got churches who don't want people doing that because that's not Christian, or it blows my mind. It really does. And I've had conversations with people who say things like social justice is not in the Bible. It's like, well, the words social justice are not in the Bible, but like, what? What Bible are you reading? Because there's so much about loving the widow and the poor and the oppressed and your enemies. What are you interpreting from that? That makes you go, oh no, this is all about crossing some line to get to heaven, or it's not. I don't know. It blows my mind. So
I'm with you.
It's good that you've had some positive experiences in that regard as well. As the kind of butting heads kind of or
it's
banging
funny,
your head against a brick wall kind of thing.
Even that word justice, I feel like sometimes can be, I don't know, like even myself, I remember when I started working at TFN and we talked a lot about social justice, and I remember thinking to myself, actually, what is that? Because I don't know, sometimes I wonder if that concept takes a little bit to show people that they are already existing within, structures of either justice or injustice. Sometimes I feel like it's a little bit of a macro concept that we can just get confused about. But when you break it down, and if you think about, I love that idea of justice and peace. There's that model of like shalom that talks about how it is all about relationship, both with us with God, us with each other, us with the environment, us within ourselves. And wherever there is a breakdown in relationship, that is injustice. So I think, sometimes we can complicate it in our heads and be like, what is that? But then if you think about relationship, that's such an easy anchor to be like, oh yeah, I can see where that's working well and bringing flourishment, and where it's totally not. But it's an interesting concept within the church.
Yeah. And so the reason I invited you on the podcast was because you're part of a team of people behind a social media account that I came across that I thought was brilliant, called Christians for Peace Aotearoa. And it's come to life in the midst of the current war on Gaza.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me a bit about what this group is, and how you got connected into it?
Yeah, totally. So long story short, the way I got connected and part of how it all started, it only started a couple months ago, when I bumped into James Harris, a friend. He was visiting over from Australia. Yep, you know the guy.
Yeah.
And I bumped into him at a New Plymouth peace rally for Palestine, and we just got yarning, and it was cool. I feel like he brought up the conversation around, what would it look like getting a collective group or some collective action happening for peace for Israel Palestine. in Aotearoa, and it was awesome because I'd been, simmering on that, especially since I'd come home from Israel-Palestine myself, and I'd been wanting to kind of be part of something bigger than myself, but hadn't found any kind of leads, I guess. So yeah, kind of through that corridor, James and a few of us started up a little messenger group on Facebook, and it's literally just grown organically from there. Anyone who would say they're a follower of Jesus and is passionate about peace and justice for all of those in Israel-Palestine have kind of jumped on board. So it's grown. Now I'm just trying to think how many are in our group. I'd actually have to check our little messenger thread. But yeah, so we've kind of diversified now. There's like the social media group, which I'm actually not a part of, but I think all the corridor kind of springs off each other in the different group chats. But so we're a group of followers of Jesus who are all about standing peacefully, but in an act of resistance for the sake of peace, justice, and reconciliation in Israel-Palestine. So yeah, that can look like our feeds on social media, but it also looks like we've put out a open letter for people to sign. So that's all about kind of calling, where are the Christian voices in Aotearoa, calling for liberation for the Palestinian people. And so that letter is both an act of, I guess, of repentance over our silence, but also is calling for our government to actually take a strong stance in calling for a ceasefire and calling for aid, to be accessible to people in Gaza, calling for liberation and the end to the occupation. Yeah, so that's another one. And another thing that's actually coming up in Lent that we're currently busy working away on is we're going to be one group, but it's across several countries, holding a pilgrimage, so a prayerful walk of 41 kilometres, which is the distance of the whole of Gaza. And yeah, as part of that, it's going to be an act of, I guess you could say that's an act of protest, wanting to raise awareness, wanting to keep this conversation, amplifying the voices of Palestinians and Christian Palestinians. We're also wanting to fundraise through it. So that's something that's kind of in the works at the moment, getting people on board to jump on board and walk 41 kilometres of a pilgrimage over Lent. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff.
Yeah, cool. And a few threads in there that I'd love to pick at. One, I just really like that idea that doing things in a non-violent way, which we would call pacifism, is not passive.
Yes,
it's pacifism,
totally.
not passivism. And so you're not going, well, we can't do anything. You're going, what can we do that doesn't buy into the violence that's already happening?
Yeah.
That this is already a violent situation. We need less violence, not more.
Yeah.
I think of, I don't know if you know Shane Claiborne, but he talks about when he's talking about the death penalty, that we don't solve killing by killing.
Yeah.
Like it just, violence begets violence. It just carries things on. And so, yeah, really cool that as a group you're going, what are the things we can do that show our support for those who are on the brutal end of this? What are the things we can do to show a Christian voice on the humanitarian side of things? Have you encountered any kind of pushback? Because I know that there's a lot of the church who are just not looking into what the issues actually are and are just going, Israel good, Palestinians bad, yay Israel, bring on the war. Which, again, when I read Jesus, I'm just like, what? But anyway, have you encountered some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think so far, not that I've been aware of. I mean, I can think personally of a handful of churches that I've reached out to locally about the idea of signing on to the open letter, and just kind of received like a bit of a year nah, for want of a better phrase. But no kind of like explicit pushback. But I think, again, this is space that we're wanting to kind of step into more, not in a way to aggravate things at all, but in a way of wanting to, I don't know how to better put it than kind of help educate the church. Like I think it's an area that I think there are both simple kind of anchors you can come back to within the situation in Israel, Palestine, and within the theological aspects of it. But yeah, I think there's also a lot of areas that can, I don't know, where mistruths can kind of be expounded and within this idea of like this rhetoric of Christian Zionism, that took off and began in the early 19th century, and just how that's kind of flown through the church. Like a quarter of American Christians would say that they are Christian Zionists. And so there's a lot of, I think this rhetoric that moving forward we're wanting to educate people on. So I'm imagining there will be, certain battles and things we'll come up against, but I think, like you've said, that way of being actively, peacefully kind of wanting to move forwards through that, I'm kind of like, bring it on as well.
Yeah. I mean, my window into what you guys have been up to has been the social media. And what I've loved about it is it's not just a whole lot of New Zealanders going, here's what we think.
Yeah.
One of the things the page has been doing is providing a place for those of us who are engaged to listen to the voices of Palestinians and others who actually know, those who know what it's like. And actually, Jews who are not happy with how things are going either. Because, I mean, to be really clear, this is the Israeli government that is doing the things. It's not the average Israeli person. And so hearing those voices presented, I think is a really crucial part of what is already happening. You've got bigger plans than that, but just to go, hey, look, let's just listen, Have you guys actually ever listened to what it's like for people over there? That kind of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was really drawn to the page was cool. Because it was providing a place to hear voices that, I wouldn't otherwise naturally have come across.
Yeah. And that's massively part of the kaupapa as well, as wanting to amplify the voices of Christian Palestinians. Because, like you've said, it's really interesting. Like I found when I came back from Israel, Palestine, just some of the questions I got from friends and family. Like one was, but how long have the Palestinians really lived there for? Or this idea of when you tell them that Christian Palestinians exist, that they're like, oh, what? Like trying to wrap their head around that. So I think there's so much, within, and even thinking that while I was slightly nervous about coming on this podcast is feeling the weight of never wanting to, I don't know, speak for someone, but wanting to amplify voices. So I can feel my mouth being clammy. So if you can hear that in the audio, that's the nerves of the holding the stories of my friends that I dearly love in Palestine.
Yeah. Well, let's talk more about your time in Palestine. First of all, like you mentioned, it was with a group doing some peace work. What sort of work did you actually go over to do? And what was that experience like?
So the organisation I went through was actually a local partner of Tear Fund. So that's where I first heard about them. And so, an organisation called Musalaha, which means reconcile in Arabic. And it's headed up by a Christian Palestinian guy, but it's Israelis and Palestinians working together, which I think really drew me to it, is that, again, it's reconciliation is at the heart of it, which is actually quite unique. There's not a lot of organisations doing that work together. Heard about them, had a video call with the director, and I don't know, it was one of those ones where I was like, bit of a crazy decision, but I was like, yep, let's do this. So went over for 6 months and was just kind of volunteering in their communication space, but really just got to learn so much from them. Those ones where you're like, you help a little bit, but really, really it was an incredible experience to learn from some absolute legends in that space of reconciliation. And so they do all sorts of really grassroots, people-based relational work, both between Israelis and Palestinians, but also between Christians, Jewish people, and Muslims, so across the kind of religious divides, I guess you could say, as well. 6 months with them, and felt like I learnt heaps, but also felt like the more I learnt, the more I didn't know. So still learning, and coming home, still learning, every day.
I think that's one of the signs that you really starting to get it, in my opinion, is when you realize that what you thought you knew you just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And now you know a bit more, you realize that actually there's so much more to learn.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
and I think we all need those moments that just, take away some of our, whether it's prejudices or just naivety or whatever it is. Um, listeners will have heard me talk before about when I spent a year working for an organization that helps with rehabilitating people who've experienced prison. And I was not in the social work side of things. I was in the employment side of things, just unloading shipping containers with these guys, giving them a shot at being employed because most people wouldn't employ them. And just the way that shaped me has changed everything. Being exposed to people who were different than me, people who were had different life experiences than me, and going, actually, you're not that different from me. We've had different experiences that have led us to completely different places.
Yeah.
But actually, the things that are driving you are the things that are driving me. The desire for connection, the desire for love, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what those guys want, to feel valuable in life. And so, that kind of really shaped me. So what ways have you noticed that your time there has shaped you? What are some of the things you I guess the ways that you're different after spending time there?
Yeah. Even as you were sharing that, I think it just made me think so similar in terms of that idea of relationships. They shape us. It's so simple, but it's so true. And there was actually one thing that really stuck with me from my time at Musalaha. So one of the guys who founded it is actually a New Zealand born Israeli, and I was lucky to be there and ended up kind of organizing his farewell, finishing up kind of like dinner party thing. Yeah, he just said this line and it really stuck with me, and he just said, relationships deeply embedded in the kingdom of God, that's what it's all about. And I think that's such a simple phrase, but it's so true when you think about people and the way we are shaped by relationship. It's that idea of, those relationships, when they're embedded in the kingdom of God, you can't help but be shaped and transformed by them. So I think for me, something that's massively stuck with me is that idea of reconciliation, and that we're all called to be peacemakers. We're all called to be reconcilers. And again, massively, I think it held a mirror up to myself as Pākehā here in Aotearoa. What does that actually mean? Do I know the stories of the land that I live on? And again, here in Taranaki, literally next to all of the land was stolen from Māori. And I think that's probably what has really struck me is that it's relationships, but it's not just relationships where you can kind of get to know a person, hear their story, feel their pain, and kind of, I don't know, stop there. Like, I think it's also this call to go further and be like, okay, so what, again, in Israel, Palestine, what are these drastic power imbalances that we sit in as Israelis and Palestinians, and how are we called to, again, that idea of actively co-resist, and how that only comes, I think, through relationship when you genuinely care about each other. So I think that's probably the biggest way that I've been shaped is learning bit by bit. And I'm not going to say I'm there yet, but continuing to step into relationships that address inequality through the kingdom of God. And I think that's probably what kept hope alive while I was over there too, because you live in this it's honestly the weirdest place I've been. Like, it just feels dystopian in a lot of ways when you're in a place that is either in a community with occupiers or living in an area with the occupied in a military occupation. It's just, I can't describe it other than just dystopian. But I think holding that idea, kept hope alive, if that makes sense too. So very confronting, and definitely shaped me in coming back to Aotearoa as Pākehā as well.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, that it's like, yes, this is a thing over there, but actually, what about us here? We've got work to do as well.
Oh, heck yeah.
And I love the heart that I'm hearing in you is, if that's true, what's my responsibility in that,
Mm.
not, well, how do I become the savior who fixes it all? You know, like it's not, we don't need more white saviors. That's what caused a lot of the problems in the first place. But hearing your heart is very much of that. Actually, if this is true, I have some responsibility here, and what is that, and how do I do that, and how do I, learn about that? How do I apologize when I mess that up? All of those things that are part of relationship, like you're talking about. And yeah, I was just chatting with someone yesterday about how we can other people really easily, and when people are different to us and we feel uncomfortable about that, we can let that get in the way. But actually, it's in those uncomfortable spaces that we have the most opportunity to learn and to grow. And yeah, I mean, throwing yourself into that situation over in Israel, Palestine isn't necessarily a comfortable thing to do, but it's something that taught you, something that helped grow you and then shape you for what's to come from here. So yeah, where particularly were you based over there?
So I was living in two areas for 3 months and then 3 months, but all around Bethlehem. So one was Peace Aotearoa, one was Beit Jala, but they're both kind of suburbs of Bethlehem. So yeah, in the West Bank. But my office where I worked was in Jerusalem, so that was inside Israel. Yeah, but they used to say, like, before the separation wall was put in, that Bethlehem was almost like a suburb of Jerusalem. So they're not that far apart at all. They're about a 15-minute bus ride away. But yeah, kind of felt like by day and by night you were living in two different worlds. Yeah, so every day.
So did that mean going through like security stuff to get from one to the other all the time?
Yeah. So, every morning and afternoon before work, I would walk from my house past the Church of Nativity, which is where they say Jesus was born. And then you'd walk through this shuk, this marketplace, and then you'd get to like a little kind of, I guess a little block of the neighborhood. And then from there, you'd keep walking, and then you'd get to the separation wall. So it's this 8-meter high, thick as concrete barrier that runs for hundreds of kilometres around the West Bank, which again, like 85% of that wall or fence, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes there's like razor sharp fence. It's not like a little cute picket fence. But 85% of it sits inside the West Bank. So again, that's a whole nother example of land annexing, confiscation from the Palestinians. And then you'd get past the wall and you get to the checkpoint, go through the military checkpoint, they'd check your passport or whatever your ID is. And then from there you catch a bus to the office in Jerusalem. So yeah, that was the daily commute.
What were the really noticeable differences between those two worlds?
I feel like inside Jerusalem, and then again within the whole of Israel, places can feel entirely different too. If you compare like Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, it's like Tel Aviv super lefty, Jerusalem just the most intense religious kind of melting pot of people I've ever experienced. But ultimately it kind of felt like inside Israel, yeah, I mean, in some ways it felt not so foreign. It did feel quite kind of westernized. It's well developed. It kind of just felt like fairly regular life comparatively to what I have experienced in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Culturally, obviously, like so many differences, but and a lot of day-to-day stuff. Development-wise, it felt similar. But then, I think inside the West Bank, I think honestly the biggest feeling and thought that comes to mind is you can just feel like you were talking about when we dehumanize each other, or when it's like you could just feel this kind of this cloud or this weight sitting on people of just the daily dehumanization and oppression that they live under. And again, it can look like really simple things. Like I think even just the fact that there's over 100 checkpoints within the West Bank. And again, the West Bank is entirely different from Gaza. I didn't go to Gaza. But in the West Bank, those checkpoints mean that your movement is restricted. And there's so many little things like, again, depending where the separation wall goes, you might be split off from your family who live on the other side. You might be split off from what was once your farmland. There's so many kind of little niggly things, even going through a checkpoint. And if you're on a bus, Palestinians, generally speaking, having to get off and wait in the line while the foreigners stay on the bus. Because they've got foreign passports, and the Palestinians having to kind of go through a line to file past, whether it's scorching hot summer or freezing cold winter. There's so many kind of little details, even just knowing that your water and your electricity is controlled by, your military occupier. I think there's just, it's like every aspect of life, really, daily life is controlled by your occupier. So I think it just creates this kind of, what I can only describe as this kind of just weight upon your shoulders. Two different worlds.
I remember hearing Frank Ritchie talking about meeting a Palestinian who his house and the dairy that he ran were about 100 meters apart, but it was like a 15-kilometer trip from one to the other to get down around the wall, or something ridiculous like that. That what had been a very simple life was no longer simple.
Totally.
And there was nothing that could be done about it.
There's this one family who I reckon were probably one of the most impacting, and again, relationships that shape us, for me. And his story's out there on YouTube and stuff. His name's Daoud Nasser. And he and his family run this organization called Tent of Nations, which is basically just a low-key, operation like on their farm where they live. But long story short, his grandfather bought their land, their farm, in the early 1900s, and then got it registered, which again, that is something that not a lot of Palestinians did in that day and age. It just wasn't part of their worldview and way of thinking. And then they re-registered it under, the British Empire when they were in control, and then the Jordanian Empire, and then under the Israeli government. And then in the 90s, their farmland, which is just outside of Bethlehem, was declared state land, or Area C. And so the Israeli government said they were going to take that land because they were going to build an Israeli settlement there, which is like a Jewish community that's protected by their military, that sits inside the West Bank. So again, it's another form of taking the land. And there's over 700,000 Israelis that live in settlements inside the West Bank. So it's a form of mass kind of land confiscation. But this family have gone through, I think they said they've had like 34 demolition orders on their farm. But they've gone through every level of court, like through to the Supreme Court, and they're still to this day fighting to keep their land. And so again, just like that, this is the daily life experience of a family. And anyway, so many pressures that they face.
And the toll that must take on them.
Oh my goodness.
Having to keep fighting that, not just live their lives, but also fight for their lives as well. Yeah,
totally. And they've faced all sorts, like violence from Israeli settlers. They've had their orchards bulldozed. They've had, they're not given permits to be able to build above ground. They're not given access to water anymore. And so all of these things, in hearing his story though, it exudes, again, that like Jesus-ness, that they're like, okay, let's get creative. We refuse to be enemies. So we're going to build underground. So they've renovated their caves. They've got like a water kind of rain, drip irrigation system for both collecting water and like planting their orchards. And there's just so many things, again, that I'm like, man, under extreme persecution, they refuse to kind of let themselves be dehumanized, but they also kind of choose that almost third way of, okay, how are we gonna peacefully resist this? So I think, there are some incredible people and followers of Jesus doing incredible work over there too.
That's beautiful. You mentioned before that you came back and people had some questions based out of, just not knowing. After having spent time there, what are some of the things you would like New Zealanders, or just those who haven't experienced that, What would you like them to know about the Palestinian people?
Um, honestly, I know it sounds too simple, but I do think it's one of those things like just get educated. Like I think but also that is hard because when you Google, the conflict in Israel Palestine, then you're also going to get the whole media flooding in of a largely, the powerful get to tell the narrative. So you're also going to get a largely potentially biased kind of story. But I think, yeah, there's something in. Yeah, I remember actually going to like a seminar from Jay Ruka when I was younger. I think when Huia came home, the book had just come out, and I asked that question of like, what's the next step kind of thing. And he just said, get educated. And it was just the greatest advice because if you actually set your mind to doing that, then I think, yeah, then we can act out of a place of, of wisdom as well as heart for justice. Yeah, I would probably say that. And within that, then it probably is that idea kind of like you were talking about of loving hearing Palestinian voices amplified. I would probably say, tune in. There are some epic people out there like this guy who he was lecturing at Bethlehem Bible College when I was over there. His name's Daniel Benora. He's also got an incredible podcast called Across the Divide.
Awesome.
So it's unpacking the conflict, it's unpacking theology. There are some incredible people and books that you can read. Salim Munaya has a book, so he was the director of the organization I worked at, which is a book that has both Messianic Jewish and Christian Palestinian perspectives on the conflict. Yeah, I think there are so many incredible resources. I can probably send you a list of really helpful little, even like 5-minute YouTube clips, if you want to share them. But
yeah, we'll throw some in the show notes so that people can follow that.
yeah, and I think obviously right now with the assault on Gaza, and just at the point that it's at where it's indescribably a genocide, I think we're at this point where there's nothing else I can say than take action. Because I think, yeah, when we're faced with these global crises in our different generations, this is one of ours. And I think if we choose to kind of sit silently, then we're siding with oppression. So, yeah, obviously I'm quite fired up because there are people I dearly love over there, and people whose family members are being killed in Gaza. And so I think, if particularly as followers of Jesus, if we say that each person bears the image of God and we are interconnected in that relationship, then I'd say take action for a ceasefire. It's one of those just inherently wrong situations that if we don't stand up, then who will?
Do you see, how do I word this? With the call to stand up and to do something, we're all the way over here in New Zealand. Does what we do make a difference? Like, what are your thoughts around that? Because I know that's what I've heard some people say is, oh, I'm against it, but how does it make a difference if I say anything? What are your thoughts around that?
Totally. I would say I totally hear that, and can understand it. There's many things that I would agree that I have that perspective of too hard basket. But I think thinking about things my Palestinian friends have said over there, I think apathy is not the right response. Yeah, I do understand it, being like, what difference can we make? But I just think, I think apathy is just not what we need right now. I would also just say like little things. Like I remember going to one of the rallies in my city, and it's a pretty small turnout, like pretty small scale compared to Auckland or Wellington. But one of my Palestinian mates just messaging me and just saying, hey, we feel that when you go to those rallies, we feel it. So I think, again, in terms of just relationship, that solidarity means heaps. But I think we can actually do more than we think. And maybe it sounds naive, but I really do believe in grassroots movements. And I know there's a magic number. Some people, like researchers, said it's at 10%. Some people have said it's at 25%. But when there's this groundswell of people who genuinely believe in something and take action for it, there's that tipping point of change actually happening. So I think, you might think you're just the one, but if one and one and one get together, I think the only way, we can make changes is pulling together that change coming from the grassroots, ground up, and then getting to that level of actually pressuring our government, and then, governments pressuring other governments. But it has to be a groundswell. There has to be enough people. I can think of things too, in terms of like boycotting certain brands that are fueling the Israeli Defense Force and the military in this occupation and in the assault on Gaza. And I think actually that's something that makes global impact. I think,
Money talks, eh?
Yeah, totally. And just like prayer, like global prayer, I think there are so many things that if enough of us get together, and I hope that doesn't just sound like a naive pipe dream, but I truly believe that grassroots change can make a difference. And even if it is just one Palestinian person being like, oh, they're with me.
Yeah.
That to me is also worth it. So, I don't know. I personally believe in grassroots change.
Yeah. Well, hearing you talk about it, we're not the government. We can't be the government, but we can let the government know what we think.
Totally.
And we can be a voice to call our government to account for their silence. And that in itself is an act of justice, whether our government acts on that or not. Because as you say, people see that, people hear that, some are encouraged by that, some feel heartened by that. But also it just, I look at Jesus and he stood up for those who were oppressed, whether it changed the system or not. He got killed by the system for standing up in that way, which isn't the ideal, for us. We don't want to get killed, but he was prepared to stand up for those who didn't fit the system. And I think that's a great example to us that actually that the outcome is important, but actually it's out of our hands. But what is in our hands is our response. And are we going to stand for those who are in pain, those who are suffering, particularly those who are suffering at the hands of others? And so, that's why I love your kaupapa, what you're all about. And one of the things I really love is that it's not just people for peace. It's you've been very deliberate about calling Christians and saying, actually, Christians, it's time to stand up for this. There are so many people who aren't Christian who are already standing up for this, and actually saying to the church, we need to get on board with this stuff that's about caring for the ones that Jesus cared about, and not to other people, and not to go the flip side of what a lot of Christians do and going, Palestinians good, Israel bad, that's not helpful either, to go, actually, peace. We long for peace. We long for the suffering to stop, and we're going to stand and do something about it. So, thank you for taking that initiative after your kōrero with James and getting something going. Thank you for your talking to us about it here. Really appreciate your passion and your belief that every one of us can make a difference in some way. I think that's so important for us to hear and to be encouraged by, because it's so easy to feel so insignificant and like we've got nothing to offer in this. But actually, like you say, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 ends up meaning a lot. So thank you for what you're doing to help to bring a bit of heaven down to earth.
Thank you, Andy. Yep, pleasure to share, and thanks for having me and letting me rant on for a while. So, no, I really appreciate it. And I feel equally inspired chatting with you. So, yay, Jesus.
Hello, hello, heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
I'm so challenged by Sophie to find ways to stand up for what is right, to not use the excuse that I'm so far away that I can't do anything. And yes, we all have limited capacity, so we need to figure out what to give our time to. But we can actually do very small things to educate ourselves and to share the work of those doing the hard mahi. So thank you, Sophie, for sharing your experiences, and in doing so, offering a challenge to us all. Sophie, thank you for who you are and for what you do. Here is a blessing for you. Sophie, as you do what you can do to be a peacemaker in the world, may you too know peace in your relationships, your mahi, and deepen your spirit. As you stand up for the innocent, the oppressed, and the marginalised, may you receive encouragement from friends who are in the firing line, letting you know that they feel seen and heard. But even if you don't, may you know that your part makes a difference. As you and others drive the conversation in Aotearoa about peace in Palestine, may you find opportunities presenting themselves that you never expected, opportunities to educate, advocate, and influence those in positions of power, and may you see changes eventuate that now seem very far off. As you explore what peacemaking looks like in this land, may you find your tūranga waiwai, your place of standing in this bicultural landscape, and may you add to the world around you in ways that bring reconciliation and shalom. Lastly, may you know you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia. Join me next time when I talk to Ruth Schmidt about why standing for what she believes in got her fired from a prestigious theological college in the States. We talk about that experience and the grassroots movement that has arisen as a result. Until then, me enoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Humai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Muro o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia, engari whakaorangi a mātou I te